anti-Semitism is a light sleeper. It is easily awoken. And it is extraordinary, I think, that how the response around the world has been so anti-Semitic over what's going on in Israel, in the way they've responded. Now, there can be a conversation about the use of air power and the use of the way they've conducted their military campaign. But there's lots of evidence, if you compare it to previous campaigns and, wars like, fighting in built-up areas is always one of the most difficult aspects of warfare, that casualties that are caused and so forth. There's lots of evidence we could use, and others are using, to show that Israel has actually fought this campaign pretty well. Of course, people have been hurt in huge numbers, and nobody would have wanted that. But ultimately, that's not Israel's fault, that's Hamas's fault. And I despair, actually, at the way the Western media quotes and uses Hamas figures and comments a lot, and seemingly has had, I don't think, a particularly neutral or impartial way of reporting on some of this stuff. But anti-Semitic, underlying this is a strong anti-Semitic view of a lot of people, and it's been extraordinary the number of demonstrations we've had that have been so anti-Israel over what's been going on, and a complete ignorance of what Hamas has, exactly as you just said, what Hamas have done. I mean, people parading on the streets supporting Hamas, but frankly, Hamas would throw them off the top of the buildings in terms of their sexuality, or in terms of their political views, or whatever. It is unbelievable.
And it all is justified with this unbelievably simplistic and utterly inadequate idea that somehow the world can be divided into two classes, and it defines good and evil, and those two classes are colonists and those who are colonizers, and those who are colonized. And I think that's incredibly simplistic. But it's also very dangerous. A former Prime Minister of Australia from the other side of politics to me, Bob Hawke, commented that when the bell tolls for Israel, it tolls for all mankind. And as you say, anti-Semitism is a light sleeper, and whenever it's awakened, it seems to me that you can assume that great evils will follow. The 1930s and 40s being the obvious, but by no means only example. And I can't help wondering whether, I'd be interested in your views on this, whether Israel is actually not quite vulnerable at the moment.
Yeah, it is certainly vulnerable to Iran. And, as we know, I mean, the Houthis have just launched a drone attack on Israel only in the last few days. And I didn't mention them earlier as being under the influence, under the Iranian influence. So it is one of the things that's changed, obviously, in the last few years is the ability to strike deep into people's territory from a long way away. Clearly, we had strategic bombing in World War II, but we've now got the ability with weapon systems that means people like small terrorist groups in places like Yemen can actually hit countries like Israel and attack their major cities. And clearly, obviously, Russia have been doing that in Ukraine for the last couple of years. So they are vulnerable. They're vulnerable to that sort of long range attack, but they're also vulnerable to what Hamas has been trying to do. I think Israel will survive all of this, personally. I think the Arab world, as I said earlier, recognizing Israel, they're not going to wipe Israel off the face of the map, and neither should they. And therefore, there's going to have to be some sort of understanding that will continue. But yeah, they are vulnerable, and I've got no doubt at all that whilst I don't want to be in any sense anti-Arab, I think we the West need to somehow strike the balance, but certainly supporting the reality that Israel is a democracy, that it has a right to exist, and that we should ensure that we give it the capabilities to enable that.